Yeah, I'm not sure why Rolf hasn't joined yet, Megan, but I know he will. I just talked to him a little while ago. And
Okay.
I think you have a guest who I sent him the link. George, is that you?
Yeah, I'm here.
That's why it says my name, but it's former Parks Superintendent George Ogren, who some of you may know. So.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll hand this over to Jim at this point. Jim Bohan.
Thank you. I appreciate it. So I've got a script that I'm going to be following to make sure that we're doing everything like we're supposed to. And thank you very much for preparing it, Megan. We really do appreciate it. We'll call the meeting to order and we'll do a roll call. And we'll do roll call by go ahead. I'll call your name and you just say here. So Lambert. Commissioner Lambert. Okay. Commissioner Lapsley.
Here.
Commissioner Rosenthal. Not yet. And Commissioner Bowen is here. And so that's a roll call. So I would like to make clear for the record of this meeting, and it should be reflected in the minutes, that this Historic Preservation Commission meeting of September 16th, 2020 will be conducted pursuant to Governor Newsom's executive order in 2920. The meeting will be held via teleconference, and the Historic Preservation Commissioners will participate via teleconference. Those locations are not listed on the agenda and are not accessible to the public. Well, the public is encouraged to listen to the City Council, to the Commission meeting live on Woodland TV, channel 20, and also by going to the City of Woodland's website at www.cityofwoodland.org/meetings. If you wish to make a comment during the general comment, public comment, or on a specific agenda item, there are 3 ways to do that. First, members of the public are invited to leave a voicemail message at 530-661-5900. All voicemail messages received by 6 p.m. today will be played during the Historic Preservation Commission meeting as part of the record at the appropriate time. The number again is 530-661-5900. To the second, any member of the public watching the live stream who wishes to make a comment on a public item as it is being heard may submit an email to the following email address prior to the public comment on the item, hpc@cityofwoodland.org. For email, please include the agenda item in the subject line. Third, participate via Zoom. You will find a Zoom link. You will find a link to the Zoom webinar meeting in the Historic Preservation Commission agenda that is posted online. Click on the link to join the webinar. The webinar ID is listed on the webpage as well. The webinar ID is 921-7009-5836, or you may access Zoom by phone by dialing 669-900-6833, and then putting in the webinar ID of 921-7009-5836. So
thank you, Jim.
I'm turning it back over to Megan now, but I think I may have already done your part.
No problem. So Jim already took roll call for us, and I just want to also request that each member of the commission respond to some of these questions as follows. Commissioner Bohan, can you hear me well?
Yes.
Commissioner Lambert, can you hear me well?
I can, thank you.
Commissioner Lapsley, can you hear me well?
Yes.
Thank you. And does each member of the commission also have a copy of the agenda tonight?
I have reviewed a copy.
Great.
Yes, I have.
And for the record, I'd just like to say to Commission that the staff has posted the agenda at a location reasonably accessible to the public. And please let the record reflect that 3 Commission members are present for this teleconference and have indicated that they were able to hear the proceedings. So I'll hand that back over to Jim now.
So I'd like to acknowledge Jay Kimura, who is with the Information Technology Division, who will be assisting in managing the Zoom meeting and the public comment portion of the meeting. Let's see. Now, as we go to the agenda, I would request that before speaking, you clearly identify yourself each time. For example, this is Commissioner Lambert, et cetera, et cetera. Let the individuals speak and please do not interrupt. I would also ask, that to the greatest extent possible, everyone mute their phones or devices when not actively speaking so we don't have unnecessary background noise. I'd also like to advise all the commission members now and the commission liaison that any votes taken during this teleconference portion of the meeting will be taken by roll call. And now we go to the actual agenda, and the next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes. And there actually are no minutes from our February 19th meeting yet. So we'll talk to Megan about that. So the next item on our agenda is staff and commissioner comments. So I'd like to invite commission members, commissioners at this point, to make comments if they'd like to. Nobody?
Jim, you put yourself on mute.
Oops. Thank you. Sorry. So the comment I'd like to make is we were just talking about this with Mr. Wilkinson. We have the Keen family home that has been in Woodland a very long time, and it was on Main Street originally, and then it was moved to 6th, and now it's been moved to the corner of East and Court. And it is actually a fairly significant historical home. The Keen brothers were one of the major builders in Woodland in the beginning, and this was their family home. And I actually personally had been in the home a number of times to look it over, and it is an amazingly gorgeous home on the inside. So I think that the commission will have interest in the home as it moves forward because of its historical nature. And while it's not actually in the historical district of downtown, it is in fact a historical resource, I think is the appropriate word. So we will be interested in what is going on with it. Last year in discussions about the home, or it wasn't last year, I'm sorry, it was many years ago. I think it was in 2009. When the home itself was being looked at and being moved, there was a lot of discussion about what would happen to the home itself. And right now it was talked about as being a business property and having office space made of it as it was. So while the insides may be renovated and the commission does not have interest on the insides of homes, we certainly have interests in the facade. It's a Carpenter Gothic, and it's a beautiful example of a Carpenter Gothic. And if you'd like to read more about it, I'm going to give you not a quote, but a reference to Mr. Wilkinson's book, Crafting a Valley Jewel, between pages 64 and 67, has a really nice write-up of it. So it's worth reading. So that's what my comment is. Thank you. Let's see. So now I think we're moving on to, are there any other comments from the commissioners or staff at this point?
Actually, Commissioner Lapsley, I guess I'd like to raise a question or a comment. There had been quite a community controversy when the electric garage was torn down. And we were indeed going to have Steve or our director of planning come and discuss both the process and be subject to questions from the public. COVID has definitely has changed all of that, and certainly also time. The building's down and there's nothing there. I don't really want to forget it, and I do think that we should think somehow about the issues that were involved in that. We all had a conversation, or some of us had a conversation, and certainly there were issues of public safety. I still personally feel that the guidelines of the Historical Commission and preservation things being brought to our attention were circumvented. And I'm still bothered by that. And I do hope that at some point, and I'm not sure how or when is the appropriate time, that we should have a discussion. Clearly it's not now. So with that, I mute myself.
Thank you, Commissioner Lapsley. Anybody else? Staff or commissioners?
This is Commissioner Lambert. I want to agree with Commissioner Lapsley's statement. I know that there was also some discussion about whether we could set up some regular meetings with staff to discuss planned projects so we could avoid something happening like that in the future. I don't know if those are scheduled or taking place. So would like to hear more about that if possible.
This is Commissioner Vaughn. I'll address that. I've had a short exchange with Ms. Meyer about this. If you recall, back in February, the commission decided that we needed to have a more regular communication with the city and the deputy director at that point. And Commissioner Lapsley and I met once with the deputy director to talk about what we would do with this. And as you said, the deputy director Coyle is busy as heck with a lot of other things, and COVID has really kind of ramped or squashed things down a bit. I didn't want to forget the fact that we had in fact created a standing committee by action of the commission, but Megan and I have talked about this, and the issue is resources at this point and whether or not we can actually make it happen. So I will continue to work with her on this particular issue going forward, and to make sure that we have an ongoing communication line that's not a formal quorumed public member, but we have a sort of a working group that can meet with the city on an ongoing basis to address those kinds of issues that Commissioner Lapsley brought up. So I hope that addresses a little bit of what we're talking about, and then that gets to one of the items that I was going to perhaps bring up later, in not as a formal process, but as a conversational piece. So
It does. Thank you.
thank you, and I agree with everybody's concern in continuing this. So, any other comments from the commissioners or the staff? Okay, then
Chair, staff does have some downtown updates to give once commissioners are done.
Okay. Looks like the commissioners are done and everybody's listening, so I'll turn it over to you, Ms. Meyer. And you're muted. There you go. Sorry.
Thank you. I will just pull up our a short little PowerPoint to give some visuals to what I'm talking about. Some updates for the downtown and some happenings that I thought the Historic Preservation Commission might be interested in knowing. So I'll go to that now. So as COVID hit, our meetings kind of postponed, and there's still been a lot going on in the downtown area. Businesses are adapting to this, normal as we know it right now, and we see a lot of things, fortunately for our community, are still going on in our downtown, and a lot of businesses are taking this opportunity to do upgrades, to refresh paint or technology, adapt their business, and some things around City Hall as well. So I just wanted to go through a few of those things. So the Historic Preservation Commission is is in the know on some of the things in our historic downtown.
Thank you.
Just one moment.
Okay.
I'm not used to this laptop here. So the first thing I would like to point out, and actually we brought this up at our previous meeting pre-COVID, but the Pearson building was approved by the previous HPC to have a renovation done to the exterior. And here you see the plans that were approved by the previous HPC for that renovation, and the renovation has begun. So it mostly has been interior TI, structural and things like that to the building, but you will see that some of the windows are being replaced, and that there is work going on in the immediate interior, that they're starting to do structural to do some of these outer elevation improvements. So we are excited to see this move forward. I have reached out to the owner, and as it moves along, we may get the opportunity to have social distance, one-on-one, maybe time slots for each of the HPC commissioners to go and kind of have a sneak peek at this. So we'll work with them and see if that's a possibility. But I just wanted to let you know that that is moving forward. I just also wanted to let you know that a couple of the buildings in the core downtown, historic downtown, are getting a refresh on paint. You'll see two of the buildings here on the left. The historic building where the Burger Saloon is located. And it's also known as the Planter House and later the Capitol Hotel. They are getting a facade improvement with paint, and also you'll see the detailing at the top of the cornice is being brought out by the different paint choice colors that they're doing to accentuate the architectural character of that building. The other one that's getting a refresh, previously the jewelry store next to the House of Shaw, and it's historically known as the Wells Fargo Express office. And I think they did a very nice job. They're actually still in process as well, but presented a very nice palette for that building. And honestly, I didn't even know that it had as many architectural details to this building as are present now that some of the paint colors and paint choices have really accentuated those architectural characters. Up on the cornice level, you'll see very nice detailing And then also around the window sashing of the doorway area, you'll see some very nice architectural detail that they are actually in the process of painting now. Also wanted to, during the COVID-19 issue that you're all aware of, the businesses in our downtown have really worked hard at adapting, and they've worked with our economic development group to meet the requirements that the county has laid out and that the state has laid out for operating businesses still. And you've probably already noticed the many parklets that have popped up in front of a lot of the restaurants to service people and have the outside seating. I think that, a number of them did a really great job at adapting. And here are just a couple of examples in front of Las Brazas and Father Patty's that they've, really tried to adapt. This may be scaled down in the future once we're past COVID, but I think parklets are something that the city is willing to look at and explore. It brings kind of the activity even inside the building outside and kind of makes the main street activated. So kind of balancing that with parking. But economic development did work hard to streamline this in the short term and get these up and going with these businesses to keep them operational. It's been a very difficult road for a lot of these businesses to maintain an income to stay open. I did want to let you know about a new business that is looking to open in the previous Scribblers location. Here you'll see on the right-hand side of the screen here. Las Brazas actually is opening something called The Lounge, and it's a new concept for them. They're looking to do kind of a day to night and have food and coffee pairing in the daytime and go into the evening with wine and beer offerings with the food as well. If any of you've been in that building, they have a lovely back courtyard that also is going to be part of that same business. And they're looking to do a soft opening at the end of this month. Something a little closer to home here at City Hall. City Hall's front yard, if you've been by City Hall, they are in the process of removing the grass area in the front of City Hall and transitioning that to a pollinator garden. And we are part of BUSA, so we are part of the BUSA affiliate. And this is to create awareness about the importance of pollinators to our community and integrate pollinator landscape within our city. So city decided what better place than City Hall. You can kind of see in these pictures the process that the front has taken that to eliminate the grass. We're trying to do that without pesticides because that is one of the main possible causes of bee death. Scientists think is pesticides. And so we are doing a sheet mulching where you can see it was cut short and then had the cardboard and heavy mulch put onto it. And they trenched the outside of the area. And that's supposed to break down over time and create a nice soft soil to then do the demonstration garden for the pollinator garden. Something that I reported to the HPC previously was a test trial kind of period that was approved by City Council. This company, a local company actually, to UC Davis graduates that were from Woodland originally, JAPA Smart Parking Technology. So that was kind of in two phases, and they just hit their second phase of trial here in the city of Woodland. And so they did go ahead with the city approval, City Council, to install 150 smart parking sensors. And we're also seeing that there's a use for this, especially for short-term pickup of food during the COVID experience. A lot of us are, pulling up to restaurants, grabbing food, and this app is proving useful for people trying to do quick service for restaurants in our downtown. Did also want to give you an update on the comprehensive zoning update that I had previously discussed. Like everything else, this has been affected by COVID as well. And the comprehensive zoning update has been pushed back. It is still going forward, and HPC is still on the agenda to be a part of that process. But actually, we are up against another deadline for a comprehensive plan that the state has specific deadlines that we need to meet for our housing element. So some of our staff has switched gears and is now focusing heavily on the housing element that has to be into the state by a certain date, and it has to be approved. So that's going to be the number one priority, and then the comprehensive zoning update will kind of parallel that for a while and then take full precedence. But I wanted to remind you that some of the areas that HPC will be involved in are the downtown sub-area. We're kind of re-looking at the downtown sub-areas, allowed uses, and development standards. I had also previously mentioned that before we had two different documents that we would go back and forth between. And now we are looking to bring that all under one document. So the downtown specific plan will be incorporated into the comprehensive zoning update. And I will provide future dates once those are solidified on, what meetings we will connect with our consultants, and our principal planner that does long range planning will come and present for the comprehensive zoning update. So this concludes some of my updates for the downtown. If any of you have any questions, I'm open to answer any of that. Otherwise, we can proceed with the agenda.
Commissioner Lapsley, I do have a question. In the painting of the Capitol Saloon, is the owner of the building doing that on his or her own, or are there funds available from the city or from the state or someplace to make this happen? I mean, it's commendable. And then secondly, I was also wondering on the process of turning the, what you're calling the parklets, taking the parking spaces and turning them into space for eating. I'm fully in favor of that, and I'm glad that the city is doing it. But what is the process, and did you streamline it?
Thank you, Commissioner Lapsley. In terms of the exterior paint refresh, that is at the cost of the property owner. As far as I know, economic development is involved in a lot of other ways, but I don't think that they have funding for exterior improvements at this point in time. And in terms of the parklets, economic development, usually the parklets would go through a little more of an onerous process in terms of review and how many parking spaces it's taking up, and kind of a more in-depth analysis if that's going to have a permanent impact on our downtown. But it was seen that obviously we want our businesses to stay viable and open and be able to prosper through this difficult time. And so economic development basically said, we're putting aside our normal process other than, making sure it's safe, life safety, health department, and structurally sound. We want to make this as easy as possible for the restaurants to get this up and going. And so that's what council agreed as well.
Commissioner Owen, on the zoning update, the council passed an interim zoning ordinance back in April. And one of the questions I had on that, and I don't know if you have an answer today or not, but our next meeting would be just fine too, is are there any impacts on the historical district or resources that came out of that interim zoning ordinance?
Actually, I can't answer that because the interim was really focused on the other areas that were rezoned during our, actually redesignated during our general plan process as mixed use. The downtown is labeled as a mixed use area, but the previous downtown specific plan still stands. So on the interim, there's designations at the top, and downtown is not included in those designations, those zoning designations. So it's really East Street was one of the areas that's heavily covered in the downtown, in the interim zoning. Kentucky has a lot of area covered. And then parts of West Main Street are covered, but the downtown is still under the previously used downtown specific plan. So it didn't actually do anything that regulated the downtown.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from the commissioners for Ms. Meyer? Nope. Okay. And I think we're on to the public comment part, communications from the public. If I've got the script correct here. So, yes. Okay. So this is an opportunity for any members of the public who wishes to speak on an item or concern that is not on the agenda for today. You may do so at this time. So I guess I'll ask.
This is Jay from IT. There is nobody connected to the Zoom meeting with their hand raised, and we do not have any emails or voicemails.
Thank you. Then I think that then takes us into our public hearings and presentation time. So the staff will first provide a presentation. And I think we're doing the additional award nominations first. Is that correct?
Yes, that would be great.
Okay. So then I would turn it back over to you, Ms. Mayor.
Thank you, Jim.
Let's see. Okay. So I guess, shall I read the rest of the script? Because after the presentation, I'd like to provide each commissioner the opportunity to ask questions or, no, this is after the presentation. Pardon me. Go ahead, Megan.
Thank you. So I'm bringing before you actually some additional nominations for the Heritage Home Awards. This is going to be a reoccurring message, but because of COVID, we had to substantially delay the process that we were kind of midstream in our Heritage Home Awards for 2020. And so it's looking more and more like we are going to combine the awards for 2020 and 2021 together. And hopefully, tentatively, I'm going to place on the calendar, on our long range calendar, something for the end of spring that potentially could happen. I mean, maybe, it will also be good weather, so potentially maybe we can have an outside ceremony if we can't have an indoor ceremony. There's still so many unknowns in terms of public meetings and how those can proceed. I think we'll have more information in January. But 2 nominations did come in, and this is definitely not too early to think about that timeline if, in fact, we will be able to do it in June is really when we're looking at for a tentative timeline. If we look at June for a possible ceremony, then we really need to start on the track of progress come January, and we're already in fall. So with that, I have 2 additional nominations that I'd like to present before the commissioners for consideration for the 2021 Heritage Home Awards. I wanted to start by just bringing back the 3 that were previously nominated for Heritage Home Awards in the 2020 process that got stalled from the COVID-19 issue. And remind you that we have 648 College Street, 550 Oak Avenue, and 409 Casa Linda Drive. Before we begin looking at the homes, just a quick reminder also about the nomination process, that the nominations can be from the individual homeowner, commissioners, or members of the public, that they get reviewed by the HCP for a possible nomination to the Heritage Home Awards. And then they are carried forward by a commissioner who finds out more about the property, a little background, maybe the history of the current owner and why they chose that home, their love of that home, what renovations they may have done to the home, and what the history of the home in terms of the community, and carry it forward to the award ceremony where they're really highlighted and honored with a plaque that can be placed at the home. So here we have a nomination from the homeowner for 633 3rd Street. And it's a Monterey Colonial Revival home built in 1931. And it was recently purchased by the Hams family. And this home was built in 1931 by W.E. Underwood with assistance from Joseph Matroni, which is a name we know well here in the commission. And the home was originally built for Mr. and Mrs. Saunders, and Mr. Saunders was the Yolo County recorder from 1910 to 1944, and stayed in the family, throughout the family, up until the 1950s. And it can also be found on page 155 of the Historic Woodland Walking Guide. And it was purchased by the Hams in 2016. And has gone through a number of interior renovations and some exterior upgrades. The home has had over 30 windows upgraded and replaced, but then care was taken into matching the architectural detail. The kitchen has been completely remodeled. However, it maintains the original nook and back door that goes to the patio. And the home has original iron gates and staircase rail that was done by Joseph Matroni. The exterior home was completely repainted, and all wires were removed from the exterior of the home to make a clean presentation. And the home had all new exterior lighting completely, including the wrought iron fence and wrought iron structure for over 30 years. The wisteria has also remained on the patio. A lot of the homeowner just wanted to state that a lot of time and attention has been placed in restoring the home back to its original charm. They've really enjoyed living in this home and in living in the city of Woodland. And I'll go to the next nomination here. And this nomination was brought forward by Jim Bohan, and it's 186 Walnut Street. And I will turn it over to him to speak on this home a little bit.
Thank you. This particular home is just a beautiful example of the Spanish Revival architecture that's done in the 1930s. I'm sorry, Spanish colonial. You notice it's got the round windows that are very prevalent in the front, and it's got a side entrance that's actually off to the side street, but you go into it through a little court. And the court itself has square windows behind it, which has got the multi-panes in it. And it is sort of the epitome of this beautiful classical Spanish colonial revival, all the way down to the chimney that sticks up the top, which it's not completely square. It's got a slight angle to it as it gets thinner as it goes up. It sits on the corner of Walnut and North, and it's just beautifully maintained. The owners have kept it in just a marvelous condition. I actually walk my dogs by it every day, or about 3 times a week. And so it's just a wonderful thing to look at. And it's kind of in line with the previous one is in the Spanish styles as well. And so this is in that same style. We don't have very many of these actually that have awards yet. There are several, but not a lot. And this one is on Walnut. And so it's not on the first, second, third corridor sort of that goes up and down Woodland, where a lot of the award homes are. And this is in Walnut, and I don't know the owners. I haven't actually approached them yet. I was just waiting. The city's got to do that sort of formally before I knock on their door, I think. But I actually look forward to finding out a lot more about it. So anyway, that's the background for it.
Thank you, Jim.
Commissioner Lapsley. I am responsible for doing the write-up for the Oak Street house, and I've done some history on it, and I will get that done. I don't want to hog things. I would be willing to take forward the 633 3rd Street. As I think you know, my wife and I purchased a house built in 1885, a very modest Victorian, at 619 3rd Street. We live on 2nd Street, but the 3rd Street people are our neighbors. In fact, they parked their mobile home with our permission at our place while they were working on it. I'd be happy to take that forward. At the same time, I don't want to deprive any other commissioners of the fun of doing one of these things. So I just put that forward.
Thank you. So just to close this out, and we can take a roll call of approval of the nominations to go forward, and graciously, Mr. Lapsley has indicated that he's willing to take forward one of them. That the process, as I mentioned, we are looking at a tentative date in 2021, June of 2021. So that, as mentioned, the city will reach out to these homeowners and let them know of the tentative timeline and see if they're interested in participating in this lovely award ceremony or award that they can add to their home. And in terms of our side, we do have some definite timelines which we can discuss as we move forward. But probably we will have to get going in January on the timeline for the award ceremony if it's looking more possible to do in late spring. With that, I will turn it over to Jim again, and we can get a consensus from the commissioners on approval of these moving forward.
Thank you, Megan. So I'd like to provide each commissioner with the opportunity to ask any additional questions or request any clarification before we do the roll call. I myself would be happy to carry forward the one that I nominated. I think if I recall correctly, Commissioner Lambert, you already have one I think that you agreed to do before.
Correct. The College Street home, and I did submit the write-up. So I think that is nearing the end of its process.
Okay. Then by roll call, no, wait. So do we have a motion to accept the nominees, the 2 additional nominations?
Commissioner Lapsley, I move that we accept both additional nominations.
Thank you. And do we have a second?
I second that motion.
Thank you,
Commissioner
Commissioner
Lambert.
Lim.
Sorry about that.
So by roll call then, I'll ask for a vote. Commissioner Lambert.
Aye.
Commissioner Lapsley.
Aye.
And myself, aye. And I don't think Commissioner Rosenthal has come in. So, nope. Okay. So I think we're now down to the nomination of landmark trees.
Commissioner Lapsley, one not point of order, but just information. In looking at the 655 Oak Street, I did determine before COVID that it was originally built in 1870. It's gone through some pretty dramatic changes, but it's one of the oldest homes. It was not 2-story. It's one of the oldest homes surviving or revitalized in Woodland.
Well, that should be interesting to read about when we get it all packaged up. Thank you. Then I'll turn it back to Megan.
So good evening again. I wanted to present just the beginning of this landmark tree nomination, and then actually I'm going to hand it over to David Wilkinson. And if Rolf has already joined us, I'm not sure, but we have some other presenters with David who are going to present the landmark tree nominations. So I will just introduce and then I will hand it over to David.
By the way, this is Rolf, by the way, and for some reason I'm indicated as David Wilkinson on the screen. So something is, just want to point that out. So there's not two David Wilkinsons, only one.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. So let me back up here one. So in July of this year, the city received a request from local historian and current president of the Woodland Tree Foundation, David Wilkinson, and Rolf Frankenbach, to designate 5 trees located on public land as landmark trees. In just a moment, I will turn it over to Mr. Wilkinson to provide an overview of the history of the trees recommended for nomination, and to also talk about projects that he's been involved in pertaining to Woodland's heritage as a city of trees. But first, I wanted to go over the provisions and process for designating a resource as a local landmark, and a few things the commission will want to keep in mind as it considers the nominations this evening. So here you can see the definition of landmark tree, and it's defined as a tree or strand of trees which is of historical or public significance, as designated by the city council upon the recommendation of the following groups: Historical Preservation Commission this evening, and then also additionally the Parks and Recreation Commission. And the tree ordinance requires a plan to be in place to preserve and protect landmark trees where a proposed development could potentially have an impact on their viability. And it lays out a replacement requirement for landmark trees that are found to be in good condition, but that are removed as part of a development project or otherwise. The Historic Preservation Ordinance 12A speaks more generally about the designation a resource as a landmark and requires the nominated resource to meet a criteria of historical importance as defined on this slide. But it defines it as a particular place, vegetation, or geology, and it has a character, interest of value as part of the development, heritage, or cultural characteristics of the city, state, or nation. Or is the site of a historic event with an effect upon the society, or is identified with a person or a group of persons which had some influence on society, or if it exemplifies the cultural, political, economic, social, or historic heritage of the community. And some of the other factors that are more relevant for the landmark tree nomination: whether the tree's age in association with the historic building or district gives the tree historical significance, whether the tree represents a specimen that is particularly rare in Woodland or the region and is considerable size and age, whether the tree possesses unique characteristics or special horticultural significance, and whether the tree is of significant size and or makes a significant and outstanding aesthetic impact to the setting as an exceptional specimen in good condition and health. So staff does recommend that the commissioners consider the health and historical significance of the trees recommended tonight for designation as landmark trees, and recommends that upon approval by the Parks and Recreation Commission, the City Council designate as landmark trees 2 native valley oak trees, one located at the Gibson House property and the other city tree located in the south planting strip at the intersection of Costa Linda Drive and Cleveland Street, the third a London plane tree located at 524 3rd Street, and 2 valley oak trees located at Dingle Elementary School. One located at Dingle Elementary School and a cork oak at Beamer Elementary School. With that, I would like to turn the presentation over to David Wilkinson to discuss the location and the significance of these trees.
Thank you very much, Megan. Good evening, members of the commission. It's a pleasure to be before you. Just to put our work in a little bit of context here, Rolf, who's also a longtime board member of the Woodland Tree Foundation, and others with the commission, we've been focusing a lot more on our historic trees lately. If you think about it, many of the oaks are much older than our historic buildings. So the ones we're nominating tonight we feel deserve more distinction and more notoriety and honor. During the last few months, Rolf and I went out and mapped, which has never been done before in the city. How many oak trees do we have left? Our heritage tree that the city was named after. 4 of us went out and tried to count every single one over 12 inches a couple of years ago. There were only about 880 in the 15 square miles. If you think about it, that's not very many per acre. To become a little more definitive, Rolf and I digitally mapped the largest of our valley oaks, the oldest valley oaks that are over 40 inches in diameter. The Shakespeare oak in the middle of City Park, which we're going to honor with a plaque next month with the Woodland Shakespeare Club. If you know which one I'm talking about, it's got a concrete bench under it. It's 104 years old, a little over a century, and it's about 40 inches. So we decided to map digitally each of the largest oaks in the city, and they're on our Woodland Tree Foundation website, woodlandtree.org. We encourage you to look at it at your leisure. Each of the trees is mapped, its address, and it has an attribute table. We have a study group that's working closely with the city to update our tree ordinance, which was last updated about 25 years ago. It provides very little protection for our native oak trees. And we think that needs to be changed, particularly in the times we live in with climate change and the immense value that our bigger trees provide the environmental services. So trees before you tonight were selected for various reasons. I hope you've all had a chance to read our nomination letter and the chapter out of my forthcoming book called Gertrude's Oaks, all about Woodland's long history with its trees and its long history to try to protect its trees. And that should give you quite a bit of background as to why we think these trees deserve this honor. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Rolf. We thought we would just take these 5 trees and talk about them, just give you a little bit of more information. You already have quite a bit of information, and then we're happy to answer any questions. But I'll turn it over to Rolf here to introduce the first nominee here.
Yeah, the first tree is a cork oak, and it's at Beamer School, and it's kind of hidden away in the back parking lot. But it's a very attractive specimen. It has a nice spreading canopy. It's not very tall, but it has kind of a typical, spreading canopy of a healthy cork oak. And being at a school, there's some very nice pictures that Megan took showing the tree and its multi-branched habit, and it's much wider than it is tall, so it provides a great deal of shade in that parking lot. And it's probably just about as old as the school. I think it was planted probably in the late 30s or early 40s would be my guess. And it's not the largest cork oak, but it's probably one of the top 10 or 20 sized cork oaks in the city. I think it's about 47 inches in diameter and 45 feet tall, if I remember correctly, after I measured it recently. I think it's a great idea to nominate trees that are in schools because, we'll be, if the nomination goes through, we'll be putting a landmark sign at the base of the tree, which gives some information about cork oaks. They're not a native species, but they're adapted to our climate in Woodland, being a Mediterranean species. And of course, they provide cork for the wine industry, although there isn't a viable commercial cork industry in California. It's much more established in the Mediterranean, especially in Portugal, where almost all the world's corks come from. But it's a sustainable resource, and it does provide pretty good forage for native species nonetheless, even though it's not a native tree. The acorns do provide a food source for various of our native species in Woodland. So this is a beautiful specimen, so we think it's a great candidate for nomination as a landmark tree for educational purposes at the school. I guess I'll hand it back to David to talk about the next tree.
The next tree is also at a historic school site, Dingle School. And it's really gratifying that our school superintendent, Tom Pritchard, is very enthusiastic about nominating trees on school property. You may recall that in recent years, with his support, we've nominated and you've approved beautiful valley oaks at Lee Middle School and Douglas. And the schools district pays for the interpretive signs, and it's a wonderful resource for the students and teachers. So we're always pretty eager to collaborate with the school on historic trees. This one at Dingle, this has been a campus for a long time. It's one of our early grammar schools, first built as a wooden structure in the 1880s. It was called the Oak Street School. It later was the Woodland Grammar School, and then they named it in honor of Charles Dingle, a longtime educator in Woodland. Campus had more oaks historically. In fact, there were 3 of this mature stature, and in the last year or 2, they had to remove one of them, which was a shame. But this one is right in the core area between the admin building and the multi-purpose room. It's around 52 inches. It's a large mature tree. It's probably at least 200 years old, so it's been there a long time. The district maintains their trees pretty well for safety purposes. So it seems to be in good health. And I don't know if you can see in the bottom, or actually this photo here, it's a little dark, but in front of it is where the other tree was cut down. And you can barely see the young valley oak sapling. I think here that in the second photo that the Tree Foundation donated a couple of years ago. And we worked with the students and teachers, parents to plant 20-some trees on campus. So we planted a couple of additional valley oak that hopefully 100 years from now, students will be enjoying, and all the native migrating birds that come through and depend upon valley oaks for nourishment as stopover when they're migrating. So we're very pleased to nominate this second tree on a historic school campus with the support of the school district. So I think we can move on, Megan, to the next nominee.
Okay, I guess I'll take over on this one. So this is a London plane tree that we're nominating. It's a hybrid tree, cross between 2 different types of plane trees, one from, I think, China, and the other one is from the eastern United States. So it's not a native tree either. But they've been a long proven reliable shade tree, and they're called London plane trees, I believe, because they were used extensively in England during the initial industrial period when there was so much coal burning and the air was severely polluted. These trees were found to be one of the few trees that actually did relatively okay under those conditions. So they carry that name to this day, but they also do very well in woodland. And this particular tree is the largest London plane tree we have. I measured its height at 107 feet and its diameter at 58 inches at breast height. So it's just about 5 feet in diameter at chest height, which is certainly the largest plane tree we have in woodland. And it's very healthy. It doesn't show any signs of a disease that's common to London plane trees called anthracnose, which you've probably seen some of these trees in town where they're stunted and they have branches that kind of go, kind of are gnarly and often have a lot of dead small branches, and they drop a lot of debris when they have anthracnose. So this tree is a good specimen. It doesn't show any signs of that. So the homeowner remembers the tree when he was a young boy in the late 60s as being a large tree then. I have an aerial photo from 1937, and it appears that that tree was already a large tree then. So I think it's probably a century old or more. So it's got great health, great size, and it's lived to be very old, and it provides a great deal of shade in that neighborhood. So for that reason, and the homeowner's consent, we think it's a good candidate for a landmark tree.
really excited about these next two trees, which I've written extensively about, what I called Woodland's king oaks, or we could call them the queen oaks. They're the two largest in Woodland. They're the two of the largest in the entire county, we think. The first one here in the city public right away. It's interesting that this tree is a survivor, because if we were looking at this same view in the 1937 aerial map, which I think is the earliest one taken of Woodland, it would be part of a farm of Virginia and Thomas Gibson, who owned the beautiful Roselawn estate there on Gibson with the swaying palm trees, the Colonial Revival Home. It was part of that farming operation, and it appeared back then to be shading a structure. These remnant oaks that you see outside of the core area, like the one at Lee Middle School or this one, they generally were not cut down for farming because they served some kind of practical utilitarian purpose, like shading a farmhouse, or maybe just a random tree that shaded farm workers and so forth. 150 years ago, it was probably a very large specimen. Rolf and I think this tree could be over 400 years old. And it survived because of its magnificence. I'm assuming the subdivider in the 1950s, when Gibson Park was built, elected to make it a centerpiece of a subdivision. If you think about Woodland, can you think of any other subdivision where a tree kind of became the centerpiece and wasn't? We have a long history of cutting down trees to widen roads, to build things. And most of our valley oaks have met their demise over the last 150 years. But it's a survivor, and it's truly a monarch tree. So we're very happy to nominate this one, even though it abruptly shed one of its big limbs, which I wrote about, that unfortunately went right through the house. It's kind of a shame the developer didn't build that house so close to the tree. It should have just been a pocket park like we're doing now over in Spring Lake with those heritage trees. But so I remember, some of you may remember when that happened 15, 20 years ago, and we had to advocate for preserving the tree, and the city council agreed to that. But it lost one of its major limbs, but nonetheless, it still retains most of its structure, and it appears to be in good health. And I just am very happy about the prospect of this becoming a landmark. I think it's the key landmark tree in Woodland because of its size and stature, its heritage, and its visibility to the general public. Rolf, was there anything you wanted to add on this? You've measured it, and
yeah, this is our second largest valley oak, and probably our second largest tree period in Woodland. So it's an amazing specimen. It's about 81 inches in diameter, so close to 7 feet. And there are very few. I mean, there are other valley oaks in Northern California that are that big, but I mean, it definitely meets the criterion for significance in terms of its size and mass. And it's very healthy too. It has a very green canopy that you can see currently. So it's got a lot of life in it still.
Okay, well, we have one more. This one at the Gibson House, Yolo County Historical Museum, is somewhat related to the Casa window, which I've had the pleasure of writing about. This was the pioneer Gibson family. I just mentioned that the Casa window historically was on the grounds of Roselawn, and the son of William and Mary Gibson, who homesteaded here in Yolo County in the 1860s. And when they homesteaded on what today is Gibson Road, there wasn't a thick grove of oaks like we had more in the core area of town. It was more of a savanna, I believe. And so they called their farm here Lone Oak, and because of this tree. And it was the centerpiece of their homestead here. They built their first cabin in 1860 or so under it. And then after they became established and prospered and built their house, which eventually became this Greek revival temple, they built a house adjacent to the cabin under the tree. So it provides immense shelter from western exposure. And there's other smaller oak trees on the property now that could have been planted by blue jays from acorns from the mother tree here. As Rolf said, it's the largest one in the city. It's just a few inches larger than the one on Casa Linda. We have a letter of support from the county supervisor, Gary Sandy, and this is another one that will have an interpretive sign under it for visitors to the museum to learn more about our natural history. County takes good care of it. They maintain it. They trim it when necessary. So as Rolf indicated, we believe these two monarchs will have got quite a few years left in them. Rolf, do you have anything you want to add on this one?
Not really. It's lost some limbs over the years, but it still has quite a bit of canopy left. And the county has it fenced off, and they're not irrigating. It's near its trunk, which is something you don't want to do with large valley oaks that have never had summer irrigation during most of their lives. So they're doing the right things in terms of maintaining it. So that's another rationale for giving it a landmark status. Pretty sure that they built the Gibson house in its location just for the shade that this tree provided. And if they called it Lone Oak Ranch, this had to be the tree that was the lone oak, because it was probably a very large tree already then in 1850, because it's probably a 400-year-old tree. So it was over 200 years old then. And by then, oak can be, a very large tree by that age. So it's right in the right location to provide afternoon shade for that original structure.
I think that concludes our presentation, and we're happy to answer any questions the commission might have.
Thank you, Mr. Wilkinson and Mr. Frankenbach. Let me ask the commissioners if they would have any questions they'd like to ask of our presenters. So I'll go to Commissioner Lambert.
I don't have any, this is Commissioner Lambert. I don't have any questions, but thank you so much for the presentation of these trees. It was wonderful learning so much about them.
Thank you.
Commissioner Lapsley?
don't have a question for our presenters. I do have a question. But before that, I want to thank them both for the presentation and for what the Tree Foundation does in preserving these. The broader question is, once a tree receives heritage status, what does that mean in terms of the impact to the landowner or the tree owner? In these particular cases, we have two that are in schools. We have one that is on 3rd Street is actually in the city planting strips. So the city actually probably has responsibility for that. The Casa Linda, we had talked about that earlier, David, a couple years ago. I'm not sure who has the responsibility for that. So I think in these particular cases, I don't really have my question doesn't have any particular aspect to it, except in general, what does this mean to a landowner?
It's a good question, Jim. Megan might have some comments here, but our interpretation of the ordinance really is that a heritage tree is defined as any oak over 33 inches, of which these are that are in the path of new development, like in Spring Lake or Country Oaks, Health Spa, where a lot of trees were cut down. So if it's in the path of development, that it would have some protection. Otherwise, these trees don't really have any protection per se. Landmark status, I think, gives them stature. And I feel comfortable that the city and the school district won't be removing healthy trees that are landmarks. I think they'll continue to do safety pruning and maintain them properly. But in general, if these trees are on private property, I don't believe they'd have any protection. And Megan, I don't really think that necessarily changes with landmark status, but maybe you have a definitive answer. If we update the ordinance, frankly, we'd like to have better protection of all of our oaks, private and public. But that gets to be a little controversial sometimes on private property.
Yeah, so to answer some of your questions, heritage trees are certain species also. So it's the oak trees that it's really preserving over a certain girth at breast height that we measure at. And landmark can designate any type of tree that has significance. Some of the through earlier. And there is greater review if one of those landmark trees is requested to be removed. They need to give some justification in terms of health, life safety, and there is some replacement value, that there's something's being lost, something of value to the community is being lost. And so there is a replacement set up in our ordinance for that. But there's an extensive review before that. But it is true that we don't have as much protection as some communities do. There is always the discussion on personal property rights in terms of most of these trees that have been nominated for landmark status have been on public land or on school district or some quasi public land of some sort. So there is a little apprehension from homeowners to, I think, and developers to put some type of designation that may restrict their ability. But I think that we can have clear guidelines that, protect the tree and potentially review things in terms of health of the tree and life safety for the future. I think that's what David Wilkinson is talking about looking at for the future of our ordinances here in the city.
Commissioner Bohan, I guess I have a question, maybe a comment that's a question also for Megan. The designation as a landmark object of anything, tree or otherwise, doesn't it make it a historical resource under the definitions that the city operates in? And a historical resource has to come before the Historical Preservation Commission before modification of the resource can actually be made, at least the exterior of it in terms of buildings and things like that. For trees, I'm assuming, like removing them and things like that.
So structures, that's true. They would come before this body. Parks and Recreation actually has the city arborist on staff as part of it, and they would review most of the requests. We've never received a request for a landmark tree to be taken down. As far as I know, maybe David Wilkinson has more of a history than I do with those particular questions, but it would go before that body and be reviewed by the city arborist. And potentially, if it's set up as a criteria, be reviewed by an independent arborist potentially also. Different cities, and that's another thing to look at through the review of our ordinances is, kind of looking at that process. Other cities sometimes have a specific board that looks at them in terms of an outside arborist and in-city arborist, and then other members, kind of an ad hoc group that looks at those types of things. But right now, Parks and Recs would be the body that would look at them.
Jim, if I might.
Yes, I'm sorry. Please go ahead, Mr. Wilkinson.
Yeah, just to elaborate on your question there, the county of Yolo, it's interesting, in their historic resources inventory, of which the city of Woodland has an older one, I think, that was done in the 1980s, which frankly should be updated because we don't really have any mid-century buildings in it, or very few. And I believe we have a separate historic resources inventory for downtown when the redevelopment area was set, or the historic district was set up. But we don't have any historic trees or historic groves in our historic resources inventory, which I think you're kind of alluding to, Jim, that might give them a little more protection under CEQA. The county does, of course. The county's got a lot more open space where you have some historic groves, but I don't think there's anything, Megan, that would preclude someone from, requesting that certain trees be added to our historic resources inventory, which I think would be interesting. If it would be one way to give them a little more protection, due process, or we could do it through the ordinance. But it's just something to think about.
Okay. Thank you. I actually have a question or two that I'd like to ask on the trees. Specifically the cork oak tree for Beamer and the London Plane. I was looking through everything I could find. While I know that Dingle Elementary is classed as a landmark itself, the school is. So we have a nomination to make a landmark tree on a landmark school, and that makes great sense to me because they're both historical in nature. However, in Beamer actually, if I read everything properly, is not identified as a landmark school, although it has history. And so the cork oak that we're looking at this point would be considered a landmark tree on a not legally historical site. I guess that's the way I would think of it, and not also a designated landmark site. So my question is, did I get all that right?
Well, I think Beamer is a historic school site, definitely, although part of it's been demolished. But I know it's been a school site since around the 1920s. So I think it definitely has historic context. But neither, kind of like Lee and Douglas schools, you know, those are, Lee Middle School was built in the 50s. And, you know, we designated a landmark oak in front of it last year. And then the Douglas School is kind of on the edge of the old high school campus. And we designated an oak there as well. So I think Beamer seems to kind of fall into that category. It is, I remember when we nominated Dingle as a landmark when my kids were in school there. And we had it's a historic site. The historic building was demolished in the 1960s, just like Beamer School was in the high school when the earthquake rules changed.
Right.
But the sites are historic, I guess you could say.
It's interesting to me that no one has yet thought about designating Beamer Elementary as a landmark at this point. But Dingle is so. So on the London Plain, is the nomination on London Plain primarily because it's the largest healthy tree that's in Woodland, and the London Plains were very popular in the late 1800s and turn of the century, and so there's essentially a historic aura around the tree itself because it was used. Is that the fundamental reason?
Yes, I would say so, because of its, as we mentioned, because of its size, stature, health. It's in a historic neighborhood. It's in a public location. So we thought it had enough historic context. And we wrote about the kind of the trend, how they became popular in the 1920s. And they kind of, they were kind of the new idyllic shade tree when Dutch elm disease started wiping out all the American elms. Now, Dutch elm disease never hit Woodland, but we stopped planting American elms in the 1930s. That's why we have very few of them left. But we have lots and lots of London Plain, so they became kind of the quintessential shade tree. And we see a lot of them consequently in Beamer Park and over in, well, throughout the city, really. So we have a long history of planting them, but we just thought that this tree was worthy for landmark status because it's an exceptional specimen and very visible to the public.
Okay, thank you. So then I would ask you, the commissioners, then are there any other questions? Okay, so then do we have a motion to accept the nominations for the landmark trees?
Commissioner Lambert, I will motion to accept the nomination of these landmark trees.
It would be my pleasure and privilege to second that motion.
Thank you, Commissioner Lambert and Commissioner Lapsley. Then I will take a vote by roll call. Commissioner Lambert?
Aye.
Commissioner Lapsley?
Aye.
And Commissioner Bohan? Aye. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Now,
Yes, thank you.
Thank you both Mr. Frankovac and Mr. Wilkinson for coming and taking the time to make your presentations. It was, actually, as Commissioner Lambert said, it was very interesting to read about these as well. So I learned quite a lot.
Thank you, Jim.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Just a real quick comment. The date hasn't been set yet, but it'll be in late October, early November. The Tree Foundation will be having the ceremony at City Park, our oldest municipal park, with the Shakespeare Club, the oldest women's literary group in California. to mark the Shakespeare planted in 1916. So we'll let Megan know when that date is, and we hope we'd like to invite the commissioners out to that. Social distancing, of course, but it should be a lovely event with a lot of poetry. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think we are now down to the business item for hold elections. Am I right, Megan?
Yes.
Okay. So this it's interesting because there's only 3 of us here today.
Yeah, I don't know if you want to postpone the election to maybe the next meeting and hope that the other member is able to participate, or.
That's certainly one way we can do that.
Or we can go forward as well.
Or we could go forward. I know that Commissioner Lapsley had asked me if I might consider doing this again, since I only have done 2 meetings in the last year because of all the issues we've had.
Of everything.
And I actually looked through all the rules, and I cannot find anything that would prohibit that. The rules do say that we have to elect chair and vice chair every year. So then perhaps I might ask if Commissioner Lambert is willing to do the next year as a vice chair.
So maybe go ahead and let's hear a formal nomination from Mr. Lapsley for Mr. Bohan.
I'm going to make it Commissioner Lapsley, I'm going to make it a package deal. If we can, I would like to nominate Jim Bohan to continue as the chair of the Historical Preservation Commission. I would also like to nominate that Elizabeth Lambert, Commissioner Lambert, be voted and become vice chair of the commission. Is it possible to do that in one motion?
Sure. In
Sure.
the circle. And then can we go ahead and go do roll call and say aye or nay?
Yeah, we can certainly do that. It's a little clumsy on the second. That's one of the problems.
Well, okay. Well, then let's just do the first. I revise my motion. I move that Commissioner Bohan serve a second term, since he was shorted in this because of COVID. He certainly needs the opportunity for another year.
So we'll go down. Commissioner Lambert, your vote?
Sure.
First off,
Aye.
Wait a minute. Is there a second to Commissioner Lapsley's motion?
Yes, I will second that motion.
Thank you, Commissioner Lambert. now that we can do the voice vote. Thank you, Megan.
Commissioner Lambert?
Aye.
Commissioner Bohan, do you accept?
Yes.
So let the record show that Commissioner Bohan will serve as the chair for this coming year.
Thank you. I think.
No, let me get back, if I may, Commissioner Lapsley again. I would like to put forward that we move that Commissioner Lambert become the vice chair. And if that's second, we can then have discussion to see if Commissioner Lambert is interested.
This is Commissioner Bohan, and I second that motion.
I accept that nomination. Thank you.
And Commissioner Lambert, I didn't hear, did you accept that nomination?
Yes, I apologize. I accept that nomination. Thank you.
Wonderful. Very short discussion. Great.
Since it was the first and the second, I want the record to show that Commissioner Lambert will serve as the vice chair for this coming year.
Thank you. With 4 people, it would be easier because you can do the seconds without a problem. Okay, so then I think we're down. There are no more business pieces of business to attend to, are there, Megan?
No, they're not.
Okay, thank you. We don't actually need a formal motion to adjourn since we've completed our agenda. So we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us on the Zoom call.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for setting it up. It's good to see you all.
Nice to see you too. Have a great evening.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.